Subelement T1. Commission's rules. Which of the following is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service? Advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. Which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the United States? The FCC. What do the FCC rules state regarding the use of a phonetic alphabet for station identification in the amateur radio service? It is encouraged. How many operator primary station license grants may be held by any one person? 1. What proves that the FCC has issued an operator/primary license grant? The license appears in the FCCULS database. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a beacon? An amateur station transmitting communications for the purposes of observing propagation or related experimental activities. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station? An amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above Earth's surface. Which of the following entities recommends transmit-receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations? Volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. Who selects a frequency coordinator? Amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. What is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service? RACES. All these choices are correct. When is willful interference to other amateur radio stations permitted? At no time. Which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone operation by technician licensees? 28.300 MHz to 28.500 MHz. Which amateurs may contact the International Space Station ISS on VHF bands? Any amateur holding a technician class or higher license? Which frequency is in the 6-meter amateur band? 52.525 MHz. Which amateur band includes 146.52 MHz? 2 meters. How may amateurs use the 219 to 220 MHz segment of 1.25 meter band? Fixed digital message forwarding systems only. On which HF bands does a technician class operator have phone privileges? 10-meter band only. Which of the following VHF/UHF band segments are limited to CW only? 50.0 MHz to 50.1 MHz and 144.0 MHz to 144.1 MHz. How are U.S. amateurs restricted in segments of bands where the amateur radio service is secondary? U.S. amateurs may find non-amateur stations in those segments and must avoid interfering with them. Why should you not set your transmit frequency to be exactly at the edge of an amateur band or sub-band? All these choices are correct. Where may SSB phone be used in amateur bands above 50 MHz? In at least some segment of all these bands. What is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician class operators in their HF band segments? 200 watts. Except for some specific restrictions, what is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician class operators using frequencies above 30 MHz? 1,500 watts. For which license classes are new licenses currently available from the FCC? Technician, General, Amateur, Extra. Who may select a desired call sign under the vanity call sign rules? Any licensed amateur. What types of international communications are an FCC-licensed amateur radio station permitted to make? Communications incidental to the purposes of the amateur radio service and remarks of a personal character. What may happen if the FCC is unable to reach you by email? Revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license. Which of the following is a valid technician class call sign format? KF1XXX. From which of the following locations may an FCC-licensed amateur station transmit? From any vessel or craft located in international waters and documented or registered in the United States. Which of the following can result in revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license? Failure to provide and maintain a correct email address with the FCC. What is the normal term for an FCC-issued amateur radio license? 10 years. What is the grace period for renewal if an amateur license expires? 2 years. How soon after passing the examination for your first amateur radio license may you transmit on the amateur radio bands? As soon as your operator/station license grant appears in the FCC's license database. If your license has expired and is still within the allowable grace period, may you continue to transmit on the amateur radio bands? No, you must wait until the license has been renewed. With which countries are FCC-licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communications? Any country whose administration has notified the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, that it objects to such communications. Under which of the following circumstances are one-way transmissions by an amateur station prohibited? Broadcasting. When is it permissible to transmit messages encoded to obscure their meaning? Only when transmitting control commands to space stations or radio control craft. Under what conditions is an amateur station authorized to transmit music using a phone emission? When incidental to an authorized retransmission of manned spacecraft communications. When may amateur radio operators use their stations to notify other amateurs of the availability of equipment for sale or trade? When selling amateur radio equipment and not on a regular basis. What, if any, are the restrictions concerning transmission of language that may be considered indecent or obscene? Any such language is prohibited. What types of amateur stations can automatically retransmit the signals of other amateur stations? Repeater, auxiliary, or space stations. In which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive compensation for operating that station? When the communication is incidental to classroom instruction at an educational institution. When may amateur stations transmit information in support of broadcasting, program production, or news gathering, assuming no other means is available? When such communications are directly related to the immediate safety of human life or protection of property. How does the FCC define broadcasting for the amateur radio service? Transmissions intended for reception by the general public. When may an amateur station transmit without identifying on the air? When transmitting signals to control model craft. When may an amateur station transmit without a control operator? Never. Who may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station? Any amateur allowed to transmit on the satellite uplink frequency. Who must designate the station control operator? The station licensee. What determines the transmitting frequency privileges of an amateur station? The class of operator license held by the control operator. What is an amateur station's control point? The location at which the control operator function is performed. When, under normal circumstances, may a technician class licensee be the control operator of a station operating in an amateur extra class band segment? At no time. When the control operator is not the station licensee, who is responsible for the proper operation of the station? The control operator and the station licensee. Which of the following is an example of automatic control? Repeater operation. Which of the following are required for remote control operation? All these choices are correct. Which of the following is an example of remote control as defined in Part 97? Operating the station over the Internet. Who does the FCC presume to be the control operator of an amateur station, unless documentation to the contrary is in the station records? The station licensee. When must the station and its records be available for FCC inspection? At any time upon request by an FCC representative. How often must you identify with your FCC-assigned call sign when using tactical call signs such as race headquarters? At the end of each communication and every 10 minutes during a communication. When are you required to transmit your assigned call sign? At least every 10 minutes during and at the end of a communication. What language may you use for identification when operating in a phone subband? English. What method of call sign identification is required for a station transmitting phone signals? Send the call sign using a CW or phone emission. Which of the following self-assigned indicators are acceptable when using a phone transmission? All these choices are correct. Which of the following restrictions apply when a non-licensed person is allowed to speak to a foreign station using a station under the control of a licensed amateur operator? The foreign station must be in a country with which the U.S. has a third-party agreement. What is the definition of third-party communications? A message from a control operator to another amateur station control operator on behalf of another person. What type of amateur station simultaneously retransmits the signal of another amateur station on a different channel or channels? Repeater station. Who is accountable if a repeater inadvertently retransmits communications that violate the FCC rules? The control operator of the originating station. Which of the following is a requirement for the issuance of a club station license grant? The club must have at least 4 members.